Get a shot of those shoes. I mean,
Man,
you
come
took
on
a
there.
lot of time putting them on this morning.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
that's a nice
yeah.
shoe.
Good time, great taste. I'm loving it.
Great shoe. Let's
Love
go.
them.
If there's one thing in my life that's missing, it's the time that I spend alone, sailing on the cool and bright clear water. There's lots of those friendly people showing me ways to go, and I never want to lose their inspiration. Time for a cool change. I know that it's time for a cool change. And now that my life is so prearranged, I know that it's time for a cool change. Well, I was born in the sign of water. It's there that I feel my best. The albatross and whales, they are my brothers. It's kind of a special feeling when you're out on the sea alone, staring at the full moon like a lover. Time for a cool change. I know that it's time for a cool change. And now that my life is so prearranged, I know that it's time for a cool change. I've never been romantic, but sometimes I don't care. I know it may sound selfish, but let me breathe the air. Let me breathe the air. There's one thing in my life that's missing. It's the time that I spend alone, sailing on the cool and bright clear water. It's kind of a special feeling when you're out on the sea alone, staring at the full moon like a lover. Time for a cool change. I know that it's time for a cool change. And now that my life is so prearranged, I know that it's time for a cool change. It's time, it's time, it's time. It's time, it's time for a cool change. For a cool change. And now that my life is so prearranged, I know that it's time for a cool change. Yes, it is. Ooh, yes, it is. I know that it's time for a cool, cool change. Thank you.
Tonight, we want to have a good time. But I think before we start, we need to come together. That is, as one. We're all Americans, are we not? And I want you to picture in your mind's eye the flag, and please stand. Jim, would you come and lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Play ball.
Thank you. We're going to have the two individuals running for school board up to bat first. This is not a debate. This is coffee and conversation. And I want to make a couple of statements before we start. One of the things that the Apostle Paul stated, and he didn't read English, he didn't speak English, and so let me quote Paul. He said, "Dikaothentes unik pisteos ereneak min prostantheon." I could go on, but I wanted to focus in on one word that he used. And I keep saying that words have usage, not inherent meaning. What he meant by erene was cessation of againstness. Oftentimes in politics, we've become a bit obsessed with againstness, do we not? There are people who have narratives of againstness, and those narratives are not going to do you or anyone else any good. Tonight, I want us to examine these individuals based upon good behavior. Because if someone, let's say, sits on the school board, if they're an honest person, if we can trust them, that's going to be a plus, is it not? Amen. We spend a lot of time in government just auditing this one and that one, and it's simply because we can't trust them. And so tonight is more of a test, that is in conversation, to get at, that is, who has the best behavior, that is to become, that is, someone sitting on the school board, someone sitting in that chair as judge. How many of you guys follow what I'm saying? And so I'm asking every one of you tonight to make a commitment. Commit yourself to a process, not a conclusion. And in doing so, I want you to commit yourself to good behavior. Can you do that?
Yes, sir.
And so if you want to act out tonight, I'm simply going to invite you to get out politely, respectfully, because this is not the time nor the place, that is, to throw people under the bus. We've got to learn how to work with each other, not against each other. Hello. We've got to learn how to behave ourselves. And with that said, I would like to ask the two individuals running for school board to please come, one to my left, one to my right. Susie.
Can I say something?
Yes, ma'am.
You don't have to agree with a person or accept what they say, but you have to respect what they say. You don't have to believe in it. Just respect the person for saying it. And respect it for their beliefs.
How many of you guys are glad that you're here instead of in jail where you ought to be? My wife says I can't tell jokes. Maybe that was a good one, right? And so we're going to try, that is our best, to get at various things. And to start this off, I've asked my grandson to step up. He's a student in this system. And yes, sometimes we as adults, sometimes we like to take the lead and it becomes more of a dominance hierarchy, doesn't it? One of the things that we see with young people, they're more about competence than they are dominance. They're developing. True?
True.
And we need young people stepping up to the plate, asking questions so they can tease out what's there and not there. Gavin, Michael, would you come? Let's give him a big hand. seats without. I promise you.
Do you want me to pull it up here?
Yes. My microphone is not working for some reason.
If we turn this one.
Okay, here we go.
You're not too much in the way of...
Test.
I say I don't mind sharing mine.
The good thing is we always have a backup. No, don't worry about it. Okay, we have a song playing on my computer, and I'm not going to sing that to you, and you guys ought to give me some kind of an applause for not singing, right? Yeah, that's great. Okay, hold on. I don't know why this is doing this, but we're going to simply quit that. Okay, here we go. Okay, Gavin Michael, step up to the plate, and I'm going to sit back for a few minutes and let you ask both of these gentlemen, that is, or make some points, ask a couple of questions, okay? And for the sake of simplicity, can we call you by your first name?
Ray.
Okay, Ray?
And Paul.
And this is Paul, okay? Ray and Paul, Gavin, okay?
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
My name is Gavin. I'm a student here in Pensacola. I wanted to ask the question to these two gentlemen. In my years attending school, I've witnessed behavior with kids around me, children my age, that seems to display them putting other kids down to bring themselves up. It's childish, it's selfish, and nobody's perfect, but when I see these presidential debates, I see the same kind of behavior. They don't seem to have respect for each other. And if the people at the top of our nation, the people at the highest representative point in our social experiment, the United States, show that same kind of behavior, how do I know that my local school board representatives are any different? And how do I know that they're not going to behave like these high school kids they're setting the example for?
You go first, Paul.
I'll be glad to answer that. I think that I agree with you 100%, Gavin. We, especially on the school board and in the school district, need to be models to the students. That if you see teachers who don't respect each other, or you see an administrator who doesn't respect a teacher, or a teacher who doesn't respect the administrator, that's a poor reflection. Especially as professionals within the school district, we are expected to be a model for our students. We need to show students how to disagree, but do it without being disagreeable. You need to be respectful. I spent time in the classroom and as an administrator, and in the last 4 years on the school board. And anyone who's watched the school board meetings has seen my behavior in terms of working with the other 4 members of the board. There are times that we don't agree, but we talk collegially, we talk respectfully, we don't bash each other, and we wouldn't accept that from anybody else, including students. I know that my time in the classroom, I kind of did like I had to do when I was at home. If I said something to my brother that was wrong, my mother would make us hold hands on the sofa until we apologized. So as a teacher, it was kind of the same thing. As if somebody said something wrong to somebody else, I expected them to apologize and to work it out. I have maintained with my own family and sons and community that I don't want to be somebody who is remembered for being a bully of sorts. Right.
Well, people disagree, and sometimes, people disagree, and sometimes, move the chair up a little bit, maybe. people disagree, and sometimes in politics you have to make a difference of point of view. You have to let the voters know, hey, this is what was going on, this is what the problem is. And sometimes it seems like it's more negative than positive, but sometimes it's a negative thing. And you have to make sure that the voters know that. You know, if I'm talking about failure in the failing school system, then I'm going to say failure. And somebody will maybe take it personally that, hey, he's saying I'm personally failing. No, it's not you're personally failing. It's the programs and the platform or the lack thereof that's the failure. And that's what we're putting out. The tone of it might seem to be negative, but what it does is cause conversation that otherwise wouldn't be happening. When I put out a sign that says, Mr. Fetsko failed, well, there's a lot of voters out there who don't realize what's going on in the school system. They're asking questions, they're starting conversations, and that's what I'm doing. So it's not about bullying, it's not about saying, well, personally, this is a contest for the heart of the school board and what we're gonna do. And sometimes that takes a fight, because if we don't fight, then we might just continue with failure. And I'm not willing to sit out right now and say, well, I'm going to talk about it this way, in a way that's maybe more respectful of Paul Fetsko, but doesn't get the information out, doesn't get that to voters, so that they keep voting the same way without all the information they need. So sometimes it might seem like it's a personal attack, but it's not a personal attack. It's more of a, this is information, this is not Paul Fetsko himself, the individual who I believe is a very nice guy, I've met him a couple times, is a failure. But the school system under his guidance, I believe, is a failure.
You're in charge.
Yeah. You okay with the statement back about that?
I've got a couple of questions concerning that, but
Okay.
continue.
Go ahead, Gavin.
Should I move on to the next question?
Sure.
Okay.
Is he doing a good job?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I was curious, do you think that our public education curriculum right now and our approach to it is superior to classical education? And if not, do you think a classical approach could produce, better graduates? And do you think you can do anything to implement a structured grammar, logic, rhetoric approach into our academics?
I went to a college that believed in the methods that you talked about, the more Socratic and philosophic and a general curriculum. And at the time, I didn't realize what a plus it was, because it gave me a well-rounded background. It was teaching someone how to think and solve problems rather than to come up with the answer. The situation that we're in now, and it has been this way since the middle 90s, the legislature has taken control of curriculum. All of the courses that we teach are prescribed by the state. At one time, we had the ability to do electives, at least at the local level. That we still have that to a very small degree, but everything that's incorporated in the required curriculum and the curriculum that must be taught using the standards that are accepted by the state are the things that we have to implement. Now, where it comes around being different is how we teach those standards, how we involve the students, how the teachers become creative. Those are the things that, for the majority of my career, that I worked with teachers on. We used at one time a process that was called the continuous improvement model that was developed by Dr. Gerald Anderson with Dow Chemical in Corpus Christi, Texas. And that process was one of the things that showed great potential in this county. We had at that time a trend line on growth and even the scores with the state assessments. It was the right thing to do. What it was is the teachers, and that's the focus of it. The teachers are the ones who drive what happens in the classroom daily. Now, they have the standards that they must teach, but how they implement and how they teach those standards is decided upon by the core group of teachers. At the elementary level, it's normally done by grade level. At the middle school and high school, it's done by content area, English, math, science, social studies, so forth. But the teachers come up with what they want to teach in a 2-week period, and then they do a formative assessment to see how well the students acquired what was going on. Using that data, they would go back and divide the students between those who needed remediation and those who would need enrichment, because you have the full spectrum. At some schools, you have more students that need remediation than enrichment, but you still have some at every school. So the enrichment and the remediation went on for the next week so that students weren't left behind. That when you moved on to the new set of standards and or objectives that had to be covered, everyone went together. And it made it cohesive, but it also gave that extra time that students who were struggling needed to have that happen. Going back to your original question, which I haven't forgotten, we have some in our magnet schools, such as at Brown Barge. We use a very different approach to it. It still must cover the standards, but they teach in what they call streams, and it's very effective. The problem becomes this. The more that we have schools that don't make the level of proficiency or grades or scores or whatever that the state requires, the more the state and the Florida Department of Education and the state school board gets involved, and they start to mandate what you must do. And it takes away the local control that you're asking for us to do. So that's where we are.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Do you think that our current approach to educating students here, our public school approach, is more effective or less effective than a classical approach to education? And if it's not more effective, then what could you do to implement a classical approach that would bring more rhetoric and logic to our, academics for children in this county?
I think where me and Paul Fetsko kind of differ on what's going on or what the position of school boards should be is, he comes at it from more of a perspective of administrator. Well, this is what the state says. I come at it from more of a perspective of a parent saying, well, we should be using this clout that we have in order to push the state and our state representatives and working with those people to make sure that we get a little bit more control. That we're, instead of just sitting back and saying, well, this is what the state requires, that we use our position to organize parents, to organize teachers, to go and say, well, we're a voting bloc. So if the state representatives and the state government want to mandate this, well, we want to fight you on that because this is not what we want. We want to make sure that we have more local control of our schools. But we're not doing that. The thing is I think that education should be preparing kids to learn on their own. When I was in school, most of what I learned was outside the classroom, not inside the classroom. So if we're not teaching kids that they need how to educate themselves, then we're failing. But we're also failing when we are having 44% proficiency ratings in reading, so kids aren't being able to educate themselves because they can't understand the material they're reading. So what I want to do is make sure that we're first focused on the core of education, which is to make sure kids can read, that they can do math, and that they can do science. And we're not doing that because right now, most of the schools in our district are running below half the kids can't read or aren't proficient in math, half aren't proficient in science, and half aren't proficient in math, science, and reading. So how are they going to be able to educate themselves outside the classroom or at home when that's the problem? And now we have 23 years of this. So we have parents who are now teaching kids who were in the same school system 23 years ago who are undereducated, didn't know how to educate themselves, and now they're expected to help their children. It's not happening. And we have to remedy that. There has to be some place we say, this is where it stops and we're going to start over. We're going to do something, we're going to remedy this.
I just want to say that, yeah, things do have to improve because this generation has a lot of problems they have to tackle. A lot of problems caused by, a lack of proper education and, just looking past the issues that these new innovative things could cause. And now we have these issues and we're expected to solve these issues. And it's all depending on this generation. And so, yeah, I agree that there needs to be a further improvement in our core education.
About that? Well, we had a county commission. You guys did a county commission forum a couple weeks ago, and we talked about economic development, in Escambia County. And of course, we want economic development because we want our kids to have jobs. I got two 17-year-olds right now who just graduated from high school. I got another 17-year-old in school. I want them to stay here in Pensacola. But unfortunately, with this kind of progress in our schools, with this kind of progress report for our schools for the last 23 years, if you're a Fortune 500 company, you have people who do research. They pull this kind of thing out and they look at it and they go, well, for 23 years, schools have failed. They're going to say, this is not where we're going. This is not our workforce. So, and right now we do have training in schools, but you know what? A lot of it is culinary arts. You know what the prevailing wage for culinary arts in Escambia County is right now? $12.90 an hour. Why are we training kids for $12.90 an hour jobs and taking them out of educational classes for that? It doesn't make any sense to me.
You have the academies because that's what the students want to do, Ray. And the culinary arts, it isn't done, it is in many of the schools, but we have 73 different academies. We have engineering, we have aerospace, we have flight academies, we have things that are very high wage, and we're preparing students to go right now to ST Engineering over at the airport. High wage. We have kids who go through George Stone and they're coming out and they're making $65 an hour as technicians in automotive. So this is not low wage. If culinary arts is one thing, that there may not be a lot of things that start at the top, but there are many careers that you have to start at the bottom. I want to go back. You've made some statements here about things failing. The truth of the matter is this: the latest grades that came out, of the 8 schools in District 2 that get a grade, okay, 2 were Bs, there was 2 Cs and 2 Ds. I might have missed.
Well, I'm also concerned about not just schools in District 2, but the ones that our students attend in this school.
Okay. Well, as a district, Ray, we are a B school district. You don't get to be a B school district if all of your schools are failing. But
District 2,
a spin.
District 2 is what we're representing here. District 2 is a D. If you take the average of the grades of the schools that District 2 students go to, it's a D.
If you go, and I'll do the averaging with it, but when you take the oath of office for the school board, you are elected by a voting precinct, a voting district, a geographical district. You take the oath of office on the school board, you represent every school in the district.
The weakest link of the school district is the school district. This is what people are looking at. I mean, it's not just our district. There's 5 other schools in other districts.
I will not sit here and say that we're perfect. We have a long way to go. But I have the ability to make that happen.
Let me jump in.
But when I watch what you talk about, you don't talk about this, and it needs to be talked about.
I'm not going to raise my hand as if I'm in the...
Right.
Well, what my grandson is trying to say is, in school, he has to practice good behavior, right?
Right.
He's even graded on whether his behavior is good or not, correct?
Can somebody give me a water?
And one of the things that we're doing tonight, I want you to examine both candidates because we desperately need respectful dialogue happening. And we need to be open, that is, to the possibility. Can I pick up this piece of paper?
There you go.
When I read this piece of paper, I said, a lot of people can misconstrue this data and take it wrongly. And that's a big problem, that is, with people who read newspapers and so on and so on. Do they really understand the data that they're looking at? And so my point is tonight, I don't want a fussing match. I don't think the people want a fussing match. I want you to make your best points.
Thank you.
And I'm going to ask you a question.
Right.
And I'm not going to ask him the same question. If he wants to respond to it, I'm going to give him some time. I'm not putting a time clock on anything because I'm not a king. You know, when you went before the king, you were allotted a certain amount of time. How many of you guys are thankful that we walked away from that?
Well, I still do at the school board.
And sometimes it takes person A a little bit longer to say the same thing as person B. And my dad used to say, Michael, you're long-winded. And so some of you guys can get my point. And so we're going to continue, hopefully, healthy dialogue. Judge them tonight by their character, their ability to behave. Okay? Now, I'll be honest with you. When you're using the word failure, if I looked at my wife and I made up a bunch of signs and I went out and said, my wife is a failure, and I'm just trying to make a point, she might not feel good about that. It might prompt negative feelings. And I think that this community needs to focus in on how to build meaningful community relationships with each other. If we're going to build a good school system, we're dealing with students like my grandson. We've got to instill in him better behavior, because the better behaved students in the classroom do better than the ones you have to babysit. Those are the facts.
Amen.
And so let's get back to this. Did you have another question or a comment to make? And you're doing a good job. I mean, come on. Yeah.
I didn't really have any other questions or comments. I mean, you can take it from here.
I can?
Yeah, I give you permission.
You give me permission. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Take that chair and put it over there somewhere, and let's give him a big hand. I enjoy students who ask questions, because one of the things that I'd like to see, I'd like to see academics return to the classroom, and I'm a firm believer in good academics, but it's not going to happen overnight, and our expectations don't need to be too high, and so we need to have a proper method to go about doing so. And so I have a handful of questions, and I will start with you, Ray. When it comes to methodologies, should teachers in the classroom be using the methodologies based upon acquisition or learning?
I think that teachers in the classroom know what they're doing in the classroom, and that we should trust them. You know, I talk to teachers all the time.
But that's missing the point. Drill down into the details of what the methodology is when it comes to acquisitional training versus teaching for the purposes of learning.
It's starting to sound like Paul Fetsko wrote all your questions.
Why are you insulting me like that? Do you see what I'm saying?
I'm seeing this.
When you
this
can't
feels
answer,
like a forum.
Just a minute.
This feels like a forum that was designed.
No, it's designed
in a certain way, so that when the questions are asked, that I'm not able to answer them in the way that you're going to want me to answer them.
Perhaps I need to do a video series on acquisition and learning. And for the sake of simplicity, picture acquisition as one of the Olympic circles, right? And picture learning as a subsequent circle that is in the same context. If we do that, in analogy, we get the gist that these two have much in common, and yet not all things in common. So we can't afford to get stuck on one axis of thought, that is, when it comes to these constructs and others. With that said, why did I ask the question? It's simple. Voters need to be well informed. Why? They need to know what is true and what are the better methods and practices that can be used in the classroom. Our students, children, grandchildren, some of us have grandchildren, yes, we're that old, and everyone involved, namely in the system, we all need the best of the best, and we should not settle for anything less than the best model of competence, period. I'm a big fan of Noam Chomsky. He's a remarkable individual, and he painted some of what I am nuancing back in the 1970s, perhaps the following clip will motivate healthy conversation. And then after that particular video ends, the conversation at coffee and conversation will continue. That is, in a respectful manner, hopefully. And so, thanks for your patience. Thanks for tuning in. And let's make, that is, our lives better by being better, right? Thank you for your time.
There are a good many people, specialists in the field, as you know, who believe that language is simply a matter of training, that a child can be trained to speak, and that there's nothing unique about this. You, I know, feel that there's something more than simply training. Why do you feel that there's something more to learning language than simply training?
Well, first of all, it's worth mentioning that most overwhelmingly people learn language without training. I mean, if you simply immerse a child in a situation in which language is spoken, he acquires the system.
But it's more than a response to the stimuli of the person around him speaking?
Well, the most obvious and sort of gross fact about language, which shows that, I think, is the innovative, creative character of it. I mean, every child is capable of understanding and producing very complex structures which have no simple relationship, no point-by-point relationship, no relationship on the basis of analogy, let's say, to the experience that he's presented.
The generative, creative structures of language.
Just that you can, as we're talking, we say new things, which we may not have said before. We hear new things.
I mean, language is, as we talk, there's very little repetition in what we say?
Well, if you really were to see how little repetition there is, you can, let's say, take a book or a newspaper or a library, for that matter, and search for repetitions of phrases or sentences and so on. They occur, but rarely so. I mean, there are particular subparts of language, say greetings or conventional utterances of one sort or another, that do repeat frequently, but these are incidentally often marginal in their structure. For example, a sentence like "How do you do?" has a structure which is, in fact, unique. It's not the structure of any English sentence. And we don't create new sentences of that type. That's just a ritualized utterance.
Yeah.
But most of our linguistic interchange is, in fact, highly innovative. And of course, it's not just random. I mean, it's innovative, but somehow appropriate to situations.
It doesn't necessarily follow the rules that we were all taught in school of a subject and a predicate or a noun and a verb. I mean, I would have the impression that somehow in my schooling I was taught to do what it is that I do now.
Yeah, well, people have that impression, but the reason is that the actual rules of language, which certainly are not taught in school, because in fact nobody even knows them to this day, are totally unconscious. I mean, what you're taught in school is some relatively superficial set of generalizations about some of the products.
Are they important? Is it important to know that?
Well, I think it'd be important to know it, but the point that has to be stressed is that first of all, that everyone knows, speaks a language very fluently and a very rich language before he ever goes to school. And furthermore, even if you wanted to teach somebody the rules of language, you wouldn't be able to do it because the rules are largely unknown. We're just barely beginning to discover them. It seems to us that there's no problem in speaking, just as it seems to us that there's no problem in, let's say, walking. But if we were to try to design an automaton, let's say, that would walk or ride a bicycle or identify a person. I mean, for example, you look at me from one point of view, and if I turned my face, you could still recognize me.
Yeah.
That's not so easy to do. I mean, we can do it because we have some special, unknown capacities for perceptual identification. Well, in the case of language, too, we have this whole totally unconscious set of intricate mechanisms.
I mean, something's built into the system?
Well, I have no doubt that most of the richness of the structure of language is just the biological property of the organism. Can't be taught any more than you can be taught to have two arms and two legs.
You've got no way that you can X-ray it or put your finger on it.
At the moment, neurophysiology is not in a state where one can detect the physical structures that underlie linguistic use. I mean, only rather gross things are known. For example, it's known that language is controlled by the brain has two hemispheres, and language is controlled by one dominant hemisphere. Incidentally, humans are, as far as I know, as far as anyone knows, the only organism that has lateralization, that has specialization of the two hemispheres. Apes don't, for example. And this is, as is well known, this is closely connected with language, and areas of the brain are known that have special relevance to various language functions. But when you get into the detailed, intricate structure of the system, it's still a mystery, entire mystery. one might say the same about learning. Nobody knows anything about the neurology of learning either, for that matter.
Now, one of the most controversial things that you've come up with is the fact that what you're saying is true not only of English, but true of all languages. There's a commonality that runs through all languages. I would have guessed that some languages were so rigidly structured that if you learned a set of 20 rules, it would take care of all situations.
Well, see, if what I just said before is true, that is, if a great deal of the structure of language is just a biological property that you bring to the learning situation, not something that you acquire in it, and if we further assume, as is unquestionably the case, that humans are not specifically adapted to learn one language or another, that is, there's no racial difference that makes it easier for you to learn this language or that language or something of that sort. From those two assumptions alone, it follows that all languages are going to be essentially uniform in that part of their structure which is biologically determined. Just as there are only going to be certain possible limitations in the kind of gait that you can use when you walk. And you can't fly, no human being's going to fly. We're all going to walk. We may walk in slightly different ways, and these may be culturally determined in part, and so on. Well, I don't want to press the analogy too far. There's more differentiation in language than that. But still, I think that there is simply a biologically determined, rich framework, which we can learn a lot about, incidentally. I think we can find out a good deal about it, and there are interesting theories about it that predispose us to acquire a system of great complexity of a very specific sort on the basis of a very slight familiarity, a very slight exposure to data. See, one of the most remarkable things about acquisition of language is that the child, or for that matter an adult, has had very few seconds in his lifetime, and the total range of data available to him is rather small as compared with his ability to express himself and to produce and understand sentences and utterances and discourses as he does in his normal life. And that again indicates that there's a rich biologically determined structure which therefore must be uniform across languages. Now, as far to get back to your original point, whether there are languages with a small number of rules that would suffice to explain everything, certainly nothing of that sort is known. I mean, insofar as languages have been carefully studied, living languages at least, they seem basically they do differ. I mean, one language is not another language, but they don't differ as far as we know.
There still is this creative aspect in all languages.
Well,
that is generative.
That's absolutely universal. That's just a human property. I mean, which is true of every language.
You're talking about a kind of a Montessori approach, hands-on, learning by doing, using projects, doing the things that teachers like to do. And when you go into it, especially in the higher levels, you give the students a problem, you give them the tools to do it, and it's a hands-on model that they work together and do that. At the lower levels, it's that Montessori. You give the kids the blocks, they teach and they learn how to build. They take play and make play a learning opportunity. You do that with some things, and when you have the time to do it, that's a good way to do it, because if it's internalized and it's seen as being meaningful and something they want to do again, it's a much better approach. There are some things you just have to learn. You have to go and you have to learn the multiplication tables. You have to learn addition facts. Now, when you do that and you use it with the play or the Montessori at the same time, that's the best of both worlds. But there are kids who learn in different ways. There are kids who learn verbally. Kids who learn kinetically, they have to write it. Some have to see it. See, hear, say, do. You put all those senses together, you get more. But there are some students who have one preference in learning over another. As a teacher, you have to learn what it is for that individual student, so that if something comes to them that is learning, that you could do the things that will apply and give them the manipulatives in order to take it and make it a more hands-on.
That's basically what I said in simple English, that teachers know how to teach it in the classroom.
Okay, I'm a big fan of a gentleman sitting in our midst. His name is Glenn Conrad. No hand? He moderated a debate the other day, and it was fantastic. I'm a big fan. He sent in a couple of questions, and I'm going to start with you, Ray. What are your thoughts on teaching and policies regarding critical race theory or diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Escambia County schools?
Critical race theory is something that's not taught in schools. Critical race theory is how we think about how things are taught in school. If I watch and I pay attention to the lines and the directions that the school board is going, and I'm looking at the neighborhoods and the amount of African Americans in the neighborhoods and the poverty levels in the neighborhoods and how they're being pushed in, and the money and the budget that's going into those neighborhoods and improve their schools, that's critical race theory. That's not being taught in school. Now, inclusiveness for students, yes. I believe that all students should be included in school. We're a public school. We're here to educate every single student. What was the other part of the question? CRT, inclusiveness.
There you go.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion, yes. That's one of the things that when I talk to people in the African American community is that the students, and primarily African American students that are a large block of some of these students that are failing, they need more role models that look like them. They need people in the schools, they need more mentors that look like them. You can't come into a school and say, well, you can be successful like me if you're not like me. They don't see that. I like to tell the story about how I went to Warrenton Middle School at one time. A friend of mine had a martial arts training course that he wanted to present. So he presented it to the students, and there's a large amount of students in the audience, and I asked them about, how many of you folks are from Warrenton? Grew up here your whole life? A bunch of kids raised their hand. I said, how many of your parents went to Warrenton and are from Warrenton? A bunch of them raised their hand. I said, how many of you think that you have a future here in Escambia County after school? Hardly any kids raised their hand. And then we talk about diversity and inclusion. A lot of people like to mention the word demographics. These demographics. I talk about these schools failing, and people are like, oh, those are just animals. Those kids see that. Just the other day on Facebook, one of our county commissioners saying these demographics, they'll never come out of it because of the demographics. But I'm going to say what people are not afraid to say. I said, you know what? You're a person in power. These demographics see that. They see that you're a person of power, and then you go, well, you can succeed, but the people in power have this idea about them. And that's one of the perspectives that I have, is I come from these communities. I know these people personally. I know the type of things that we need to do to reach out to the parents who are the people that we need to get in touch with, and we need to touch, and we need to bring into the school system in order to make sure that these students are going to succeed. Because education doesn't just happen in this classroom. It happens outside the classroom. But the school board and the school system itself needs to be aware of that and do things that reach out into the communities. We can't have schools that fail in communities that don't. If the schools are failing, the community's failing. If the community's failing, the school's failing. So if we're allowing the parents, like I said, we have parents who went to the school system and they couldn't read at proficiency. They're not able to help their kids in school. But then we have things like, I like to tell another story about a school, Warrenton Middle School, about 8 years ago, because my daughter was in 5th grade at the time at Warrenton Elementary School. They were going to have a meeting about Warrenton failing 8 years ago. So I guess it was decided on Friday to have a meeting on Monday. They announced it in the paper on Saturday. And when 4 or 5 parents showed up on Monday, they were like, well, see, this is the problem. Nobody shows up for these meetings. Well, in my community, and myself included, I work. At the time, I didn't have paid time off. I didn't have vacation days. So if I hear about a meeting on Sunday, I work on Monday till 7 o'clock. They got a meeting at 5 o'clock on Monday. Guess who's not coming? We need to have that perspective on the board for these parents so that that's being done. It's almost like there's a bubble. It's like, okay, well, I work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. I get paid days off. I get this. Why aren't the people who are out here failing, and why aren't these parents able to do what I can do? Because they're not. 80% of these kids' parents are probably working 2 jobs, or single mothers without transportation who are fighting just to put food on the table, and then they care about their kids and they care about the kids' education, but they don't have the time or energy to be involved.
Did you want to comment?
Do you want me to comment on what was said, or do you want the critical race theory is something that's been banned in the state of Florida as far as instructional inclusiveness? I worked in special education the majority of my career. I believed in including students from day one. I've had deaf students who were self-contained, they were mainstream, they were included, the whole gamut. And that inclusiveness is not just with handicaps, it's with all ethnicity and everything else. I'm going to go back and then say that there's one thing that I agree with Ray with. Parents have a hard time making it to meetings and things, and that is recognized. People don't ignore that. That's the reason that we did the announcement system, the call out. The principals could do a call out to every correct phone number that they're given so that the parents are alerted. They know well ahead of time. We have the marquees and things that go up, flyers that go up. There are PTA organizations and others. But one of the biggest things that has been a real positive, especially with the more economically challenged families, is the Guardian program. There are social workers who go in and work with the families, not just the child, but with the parents, helping them to get to medical appointments, helping them to go and be able to apply for positions and jobs, alerting them to things that are open, working with them if they have a financial problem, a hardship, the power's been turned off, getting them connected to social services. This has been something that has been outside of education for the majority of education, okay? In the past, the social workers, or what we call the visiting teachers, were there to look at truancy and to look at behavior and other things. So we saw the need that if the community can't get to us, we're going to go into the community, and that Guardian program is one of the ways that we're doing it. I was on a thing this morning with the teachers group that wanted to ask questions, and they says, well, what's one of the things that you found as being really helpful in making that connection? I said, as a teacher and as an administrator, I encouraged all of my teachers to make home visits at the beginning of the school year. When you get your class roster, you visit every child's family that's on there. And if they can't meet you at this time and you have to go after school hours, so be it. If you have to go on a weekend, so be it. And if you don't feel comfortable going alone, I'll go with you. And so I had several of especially my ESE teachers who said, I don't want to go by myself. And I say it now. If there's a teacher out there who says, I don't want to make this home visit without somebody to go with me, I'll go with you. Because when you see the conditions that the students come from, you have a better understanding of what those needs may be and what things are keeping that child from being focused on education. If they're hungry, if their clothes aren't washed, if they don't have power in the house. I made a home visit at the north end of this county that the family was still living in a house that had a dirt floor. And people wondered, why does this child come to school and she has an odor about her? They didn't have running water. It was cold in the winter. They didn't have a way to wash it. But the schools take up, and they do this now in all the schools. They have clothes closets so that if a student doesn't have it, that we will go and we'll take those clothes that they wore, give them clean ones, wash the clothes, send them home. We are doing a lot as a school district that doesn't get advertised, doesn't get publicized, and people may not know. I am proud of the things that we have worked on for all going on 40 years now that I've been in the district. I started in 1978 as a teacher, and I've been going and doing things since then. But yeah, we do have a lot of work to do, and we don't need to ignore when families can't get there. But then, you have a point where they have to take some. We'll send them in the navigator into the home. But there are people who turn it down. There's a big thing that happens with now that we're going back to the not free lunches for everybody as we've had the last couple of years, but the families will have to make an application for free lunch, and it's based on economics, okay? At the elementary and middle school level, we have a very high percentage of our students who are on free lunch. Over 60%, maybe even closer to 80%. But at the high school, it's like only 20%. So what happens? The big thing happens is the students go along, especially at high school, they're embarrassed to say that my family doesn't have it, and they take the application and throw it away. The parents never see it. What we've done to get over that is when at the school they list all the family members, all the students, elementary, middle, and high, and if there's one family member is able to qualify, then we reach out to make sure that the family, the parent, the guardian says, yeah, all 3 of my kids need to have it, so that it doesn't get misdone.
Well, see, I have to ask you about this then. So if the Navigator program was successful, and the free lunch program was successful and helped the students, right? So this year, you guys rolled back the Navigator program, didn't you?
No, we increased it.
Increased it from, this coming budget.
No, we have not, no.
Okay, I was told that it was rolled back. I mistook that. But my thing is we have these programs, and we could do more. And when we talk about, so we're having the millage rate and the rollback on the tax rate come up. We have a bunch of teachers' positions that we need filled. We have teachers, I talk to them all the time, who aren't getting paid what they're worth. My daughter's elementary school teacher, kindergarten teacher, was waitressing at a barbecue place to make ends meet after school. I have a friend who's a teacher at Oakcrest Elementary School. She's delivering pizzas after school. Why are you voting to roll back the taxes without having first had these conversations, especially in town hall meetings with the citizens of your district, in order to see where we're gauging on whether or not we believe that it might be worth it to pay $3 more a month on a piece of property in order to ensure that our students get the funds and the schools get the funds that they need?
And please give a quick answer, because I have one more question.
I will try to make it quick. The money that's involved in that, the tax rates, the millage rates, is capital money, Ray. It can't be used for anything except buildings and construction. So doing that does not do anything more with navigators or services in that way, shape, or form.
But are we using general budget for that, for buildings and services?
No, we're not.
Okay.
We thank, and I want to do this, I want to thank every citizen in Escambia County that voted for the local option sales tax that has been in place since 1998. The money that has come into this district with that sales tax initiative has been the biggest blessing the school district could have, because we don't need money that comes from general fund to do that. And it's paying for the new Myrtle Grove Elementary, it's paying for the new Pleasant Grove Elementary, it paid for Blue Angels, Kingsfield Elementary, Beulah, the new Beulah Middle School. All of this construction, all of the roofs, everything else has been done because of that. And the half-cent sales tax watchdog committee is a group of citizens who sit to watch to make sure that that money is spent in the right way. And the other part about it is not one penny of the money that comes in on that sales tax can be used for a building that doesn't house students. So there's no administrative building that the funds could be used for.
Okay, we're going to go over time about 2 minutes with these two individuals, because I think this next question is important to every one of us. And I want us to pay close attention, that is, to the way that you guys answered this. There was a school shooting that is in Texas. Mm-hmm. Our officers were there. The number was high. They were hearing the bullets fly. I don't know about you, but that's just painful to think about. When you watch the footage, it almost seems like that can't be true. And so what I want from both of you this evening, what are your plans? What are you going to put on the table that is concerning the protection of our children and our teachers in the school system? Ray, would you go first?
Both those events, that event hit me particularly hard because I do have a 7-year-old who's in the schools. And, and 10 years before, when the shootings happened in New York, I had 2 7-year-olds in school. They're 10 years apart. So yeah, it's, as a parent, it sucks to send your kids somewhere that you're not in control of them, where you don't have that, and you have to make sure that the schools are safe so that parents feel safe sending their kids to school. One of the things I talked to is Chief David Alexander he used to be the chief of police for the Pensacola, about what we could do to start a in-school police department. Kind of what the university system has, what Uvalde had. Unfortunately, Uvalde failed at their mission. Where we maybe have 2 police officers at each school, so that we have a coverage, like say we have 2 officers at Warrenton Elementary, 2 at Warrenton Middle School, 2 at Navy Point, 2 at West Pensacola, but they can cover each other through the schools, and that those officers are mission specific for our schools. Right now, what we have is school resource officers, and the problem with that is you have one, and then if something happens, we have to call and wait for a police response. If we have our own police department and say 2 officers at every school, if one event happens at this school, we already have 2 officers there. And we have, within 5-minute radius, another 5 or 6 officers that could get there and that are trained specifically for those kind of events in our school. So they know where the classrooms are, they know who the teachers are, they know the ins and outs of every school. So that, but then also we could use them as a presence on the school to keep violence down, to deal with drugs, to and see, that's another thing that along with that is keeping some of these kids from becoming involved in the law enforcement system for minor violations that we could deal with within the school system, instead of having to call the sheriff's department, so that we have our own police department to deal with it. And and that's basically the ideas that I have, and also to make sure that we have anti-bullying programs in schools, so that we're identifying these kids from kindergarten on up and making sure that there's bullying intervention, not just for the people who are being bullied, but for the students who are being bullied. Because sometimes you see these weren't just the bullies who are coming back and doing these things, these are the people that were bullied. So we gotta make sure that not only are our students who are bullying are intervened in, but also the kids who are receiving the bullying are intervened. And that we work with our parents and our community organizations and our social workers to make sure that these kids are all receiving the treatment and the services that they need to overcome these problems, so that we don't have a kid in kindergarten who makes it to 9th grade, 10th grade without being intervened in, and it has a problem that comes into a school shooting. But for general population, we have some security measures in force, but I think that I would like to see us create our own police force within the school system that would be able to combat these kind of situations.
Great, thank you. Paul?
I'll start off with this. The Escambia County School District needs to be very proud of the law enforcement programs that we have in place. In 2001, when the Twin Towers fell, then Superintendent Jim Paul initiated the Protection Services Department. His whole thing, what he said was, we are the place that train the pilots that drop the bombs on the terrorists. And if they're going to hurt somebody, they're going to come back to our community. So long before Uvalde, long before Sandy Hook, long before Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, Escambia County schools have had a protection services department. We began hardening then with fencing, with cordoning off so that you only had certain doors for access. And we had school resource officers. We had them at the secondary schools. And for some of the reasons, it was protection, but it was also to make sure that behaviors and other things that could happen. Those police officers and then DARE officers who would come into elementary were working on anti-drug policies, anti-smoking, other things within the community. When Marjorie Stoneman Douglas happened down in West Palm or Fort Lauderdale, the state came out and had all these mandates, and we were very, very happy to do it. There's a lot of stuff that happens and that we have in place that by law I cannot tell you. It is a plan to keep students and teachers safe, and I will not reveal some things, but we're a lot more protected. Uvalde has nothing. When the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas case was done, and it was Guillory was the name of the sheriff from Pinellas County who led the investigation of what happened at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. He then went on a statewide tour of such to look at what was in place in different districts. When he left here, it's a 2019 statement that's in the Tampa Tribune, and he said, Escambia County gets it. No other district in the state of Florida has in place what Escambia County does. We continue to do that. At the secondary level, we're using school resource officers. We have a contract with the Sheriff's Department so that we have 2 at high schools, we have 1 at middle schools, but we have in every elementary school a guardian. The guardian program is one of the things that came out of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. Our guardians are trained by the Sheriff's Department. They have to have the proficiency in shooting. They have to be on the gun range. Some of the requirements for our guardians are more stringent than what happens for somebody who goes into the Sheriff's Department. I'm very proud of what they're doing. We now have an excess of guardians that have come on board so that if somebody's absent, we're able to replace them. If one school is having problems, if there's something in the community that was going on, we can relocate additional guardians and or resource officers to that school for the length of time till things calm down within the community. So those all go in place. The one thing that I want to see that's done different, because there's been a lot that's gone into mental health with this too, and I'm going to say this and I believe it. Everybody wants to say guns. Guns don't hurt people. People hurt people. Okay, and do I think that we need to have a lot of people running around with AK-47s and assault rifles? No, but I don't think that the people who do that get them legally are a problem. We have a society that has a lot of mental health needs. We have a lot of things in place now to address mental health in the schools, and it's expanding every day. What I'd like us to see us do, and what I will share with Protection Services, is to have someone designated to monitor social media, because all of the things that, well, not all, a good number of the events that were school shootings happened, and there were things on Facebook and other social media platforms that never got addressed, and we need to have somebody, whether it's in the actual Sheriff's Department or within our Protection Services, monitoring our students' social media pages.
I will not apologize for this going past 45 minutes because our children are important. Amen. And we need to spend the time, effort, and money to better our school system. And this is basically where it starts. And so I'd like to thank both of you gentlemen for being here. So let's stand up, shake hands, and hug one another, and we'll bring the other two.
I don't mind a hug.
Thank you, sir.
Can you guys shake hands?
Yeah, I'm coming around. I was coming around behind you. I thought you were going to go the other way.
All right.
Thank you.